If I only had one sentence to describe the video game Space Slalom, it would be that Space Slalom is a Toaplan shoot-'em-up for pacifists. And what I mean by that is that Space Slalom has all of the mechanics of a shoot-'em-up without any shooting. You only navigate the ship through obstacles. Moreover, Space Slalom is developed by a company called Orca that would later become Toaplan. Now, Orca really didn't last very long. It only made a few games, but in all honesty, the history of Orca is much more interesting than any game it developed. You can see the beginnings of what Toaplan would make in these early Orca games, Space Slalom included. However, it is just the beginnings. Space Slalom has a long way to go to compete with the future games Toaplan would make like Truxton. The goal of Space Slalom is to navigate your ship a given distance within a certain time limit. To accomplish this goal, you can steer left or right, you can speed up or down by using the up or down directions on the control pad, and this seems to be about it whenever it comes to the game mechanics. You lose time if you don't make it through each of the gates. You can also run into what seem like meteors that slow you down. And honestly, that seems to be it in the game. Even by 1983 standards, this seems fairly minimalistic. It plays much more like a tech demo than a full game. This is extra disappointing since the game plays like a really good tech demo. It is one of the best controlling games I've played on the SG-1000. The ship sprite is also one of the best looking sprites I've seen in any of the SG-1000 games. The game feels fantastic, there just isn't much to do. And that's a problem with Space Slalom. It gets boring after about 5 or 10 minutes. It feels unfinished. The pieces that are there are very polished, but it just seems like there should be something more to do. And I don't know if this has to do with the company Orca and the various problems that they had in 1983, so let's just kind of go through and take a brief moment to look at the company Orca itself. I haven't had much luck researching the company Orca. There's little information on the web, and what is there doesn't seem 100% reliable. The company seems to mainly have been an arcade company and to have gotten its start in arcades with a game called Congrilla, which is less of a Donkey Kong clone and more of a Donkey Kong ripoff. This was in 1981. However, by 1983, Orca closed their doors. Most of the information on the internet points towards them being closed down suddenly by the Yakuza. Now, this isn't as ridiculous as it first sounds. The Yakuza were more involved than you might think in Japanese video games. Much like the history of arcades in the United States, arcades were viewed in similar terms as gambling, and thus regulated under similar rules in many cases. Since the regulations were similar, video games are an easy side business when already dabbling in the gambling industry. However, most stories seem to paint the picture that a member of the Yakuza just burst into the company one day wanting to speak with the boss, and this forced the company to close in a very sudden manner. Whether this event actually happened doesn't seem to really matter for the company's closure. In actuality, Orca closing seemed anything but unexpected. An interview with Tatsuya Uemura, an employee at the time who continued to Toaplan, shows that the company was probably bankrupt before he was even hired. He mentions how the company name was being removed from the building's lobby his first week with the company. And given that Space Slalom appears to be a later 1983 release, this could be why the game has that unfinished feel. Up until now, I've been describing Space Slalom as a polished tech demo. Another description for Space Slalom that I can think of is that it's a high-score-centric game without the risk versus reward dynamic that made most of these games great. The only option that you really have for risk-taking is potentially going too fast to make it through the gates. It is missing the other things that arcade games had at the time. The risk versus reward of the double ship in Galaga comes to mind, or going for the fruits or eating the ghosts in Pac-Man instead of just going the safe distance and trying to get all of the dots. All of these is what made the high-score based gameplay great. And worst of all, this seems to be the most expensive SG-1000 game. It rarely comes up for auction. I'm not sure if this has to do with Orca's quick closure or just because the game wasn't very good. My suspicion is that it was due to Orca's closure. After all, I would rather play this, as boring as it is, more than Safari Hunt, for example. Most of the value in this game comes from the rarity, making this another example of how Holy Grail collector games are more often than not very good games. If you enjoyed this video, check out my last video of Sega Galaga. Also go back and watch the series from the beginning. Also, my next video will be Pachinko 2. Also, feel free to comment, especially if you've played Space Slalom. I love reading your comments. And also, SegaNerds.com. Go there for a lot of great Sega information.